Hi everyone, welcome to the channel. I have for you today an interview with Russ Croman. 1 year ago, about on this day actually, I had a conversation with him as well. It was about what was then the brand new and shiny BlurXTerminator. New to the scene, and it really was a wow. That's what I named the video. Well, like a gift for the season, he now, 1 year later, is coming back with a new training, a new AI version of BlurXTerminator that comes with new capabilities. In this interview, then, I'm going to be demonstrating some of those new performance capabilities. Some of them are subtle, other parts are actually quite dramatic. Never short, though, when I make these videos, because I want to show you in depth exactly what to look for, what you can take advantage of now. So down below, I'm going to have links for Russ Croman's website where you can read the release notes. Please go visit that page. I'll also have a sponsored link down below. So if you'd like to grab the new version, because you don't already have BlurXTerminator, well, this video will be showing you how to go from zero to hero instantly. Now, if you already have BXT, what's nice is that you'll be able to quickly see the difference between what was the previous version, training version, AI2, to what is now AI4. And it's, again, it's really just really cool. So the other thing, of course, I have to mention is that you're going to see some pictures in this presentation that I've created. If you want to learn more about how to create pictures like them, some of the secrets I show, please become a member of my site at Atom Block Studios. You'll learn all about astrophotography, about good explanations of how to solve problems and make your own beautiful pictures of the universe. So thank you very much for joining me. I look forward to sharing this conversation I had with Russ, and if I don't have another video before the end of the year, please have a happy new one. Thank you very much. Hey Russ, how are you doing?
Good, Adam. How are you?
I'm doing okay. So it's a year later since we last got together and had a great conversation. It really was a wow. It was the first time that BlurXTerminator became available and you had released it to the world. A year later now, you gave me another opportunity to work with your latest and greatest version. You have a new AI version of BlurXTerminator. I had a chance to play with it, and I'm going to show some examples of what I thought was particularly cool about it. But I'd like to, of course, give you an opportunity to explain all of the neat benefits to the new version, how it is different than the recent or the previous ones. And yeah, then we'll check out some cool examples.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me on your channel again. Appreciate it. And yeah, here we are 1 year later, and I've been working very hard for pretty much nothing but the last 6 months. Just solid, trying to improve the performance from the original version of BlurXTerminator. And the areas that I wanted to address were basically accuracy. I wanted to increase the accuracy of the deconvolution at all brightness levels in an image. And I wanted to expand the range of optical aberrations that BlurXTerminator can recognize and correct. The original version was pretty good at simple aberrations like a little bit of coma, that sort of thing. But I wanted to really expand that range out to pretty much any aberration that you can think of and mathematically model that a telescope would produce. So yeah, I have a bunch of release notes available on the website that go through all the changes in detail.
Great. I'm going to navigate to your website here. And so just tell me where to go in a moment, because I've got my little thing in the way again. It's always in the way, I swear. So I'm going to go to Info, and then you have it under News and Articles, right?
News and Articles, yeah.
And then the very first item here on the list is BlurXTerminator 2.0 with the AI4 release. So I'll go there. And I did have an opportunity to look at this page, and what you've done is, with some sliders, you've shown some examples of how it is improved with the original image, what AI2 was doing, and now, some of the improvements can be seen by comparing AI2 to AI4. It looks like this first one, It was a really important one for me because of some of the work that I've been doing on stars that are very strongly aberrated. In the AI2 version, it was possible to have stars that showed some artifacts when BlurXTerminator tried to do its job. The stars might have little flares or doubling or things like that. And
Right.
if you move this slider around, you can see what AI2 did, which is super fantastic. But then it may be hard to see in the recording, but there's a little bit of ghosting going on here, and AI4 completely clears that up. So
That's
that
right.
was just spectacular.
Yeah, and so that first one is an example of the expanded optical aberration correction, and it's going to be difficult for folks to see on the YouTube video. So I encourage everyone to go to the website and you can look at this image in full size. And yeah, you explained it exactly right. That it's showing the original on the left, AI2 in the middle, and then AI4 on the right. And this is an image taken with a good telescope. This is a Takahashi FSQ 106. But our sensors these days have gotten so big and the pixels have gotten so small that we really capture every little blemish that the optics produce. And AI1 and AI2 were trained on minor amounts of coma, but not really a lot of chromatic aberration. The big change in AI4 is it's been trained on, like I said earlier, pretty much every optical aberration under the sun. So not only can BlurXTerminator recognize those aberrations, but also correct them.
And I'm going to be showing, I think, what is a fantastic example. I'll be able to zoom in and show it with a little more detail. Another benefit here is that there's an improved performance in dense star fields, which I'll also be able to show here in a moment, and hopefully in a surprising way. One of the other elements that is important under the hood is that this version is one that operates only on linear images. So say just a few things about that.
Yeah, this is a really important update. It's from most users' perspectives, this is kind of an under the hood update. But neural networks tend to work best when they are given inputs that have their values well distributed within a defined range, let's say between 0 and 1. And as we all know, image data in PixInsight is already in that range. But linear astronomical images, the values are not well distributed between those two endpoints, 0 and 1. As we know, most of the image information, most of the interesting information is smashed up against the dark end of the histogram, and that's why we do stretching. Well, it turns out neural networks are easier to train and easier to get good results from if they're given inputs like that too. The primary thing that this image is showing, that error, is flux conservation. So AI2 was not good at conserving flux. And so this image and the data below it are showing the measurements of the flux in red, green, and blue channels for a couple of randomly chosen stars in the image. As you can see from the numbers, the flux is very well conserved to the third decimal place. So that was a major area of focus, and really why it took so long to get this update out was I had to figure out a way to get a neural network to process a linear astronomical image directly with none of that intermediate stretching. And that's the big kind of under the hood change with AI4 is that it doesn't do that anymore. It just takes the image directly from PixInsight and then ships it back with the deconvolved result.
Okay, and then some of these other things are a little bit more specialized, and we'll have an opportunity, I think, in some of the examples to go into a little more detail about the behavior or the performance of BlurXTerminator today. So why don't we jump into PixInsight and check out exactly what some of these things look like.
Sounds good.
All right. All right, so I'm super excited to show a couple of these examples of what I feel are really interesting as far as, you know, the performance of the new version of the AI. What I've got are some monochrome images here. This is red, green, and blue data of a relatively subtle field. It's near the object NGC 1491. And one of the new things that you would explain in the release notes is that nowadays it actually makes sense to correct an image first in terms of its aberrations, and then you can do things such as color calibrate the image. And then following that, if you still wanted to do more deconvolution, you can apply further deconvolution with a BlurXTerminator. That has some benefits not only in terms of wide field images like this, is what I'm going to be demonstrating, but also in other very specialized applications such as mosaic creation and things like that. So let me just put together these particular 3 images and generate a color image. I've already loaded them into channel combination. I'm just going to hit do it. And this is an uncolor calibrated image. In fact, if I display this with the screen transfer function here, and I have it linked, it's going to look terrible, as you would expect. So if I do an unlinked version, you can kind of see a little bit of what's going on. And what I'd like to do is not only show you the center of the frame, but I'm going to show you the top terrible corner of the frame, which is up here. And you can see that these stars are just absolutely wacky. They're really goofy in nature. So here's where a correction would be great. And I am going to then take BlurXTerminator here, and all I'm going to do is just check the box for correct only. I'm not asking it to do any further deconvolution other than look at those aberrations and try to figure it out. So let's go ahead and apply that. It's my hope, I'm running so many things here, that it's not going to take forever. No, it looks like it's going to go. This is one of these big chips, though. This is the QHY 600, so it is a big chip. Still, taking advantage of the GPU, even though I must be running like 20 things right now to do this. And there we go. That's amazing. That really is. So here is the before, and here's after. Now keep in mind, I am zoomed in at 300% at the moment. If we go out to the actual 100%, and you look at the before and the after, you can see, there's an improvement, but zooming in, pixel peeping, if you will, is really amazing. Incredible. I'll go something closer to the middle of the frame. In fact, let me just go ahead and find the nebula, if I can here. Oh, there it is. And if we zoom in here, now I do a before and after, you can see that the aberration correction is modest in the center because, in the center of the frame, the aberrations are not expressed as strongly in focus as they are towards the edges. But there still is a marked improvement, not only in the stars, but also in the nebula. If you look at the nebula, and you explained this in our video 1 year ago, that the aberrations, of course, are agnostic for anything in the frame, so everything gets an improvement based on those corrections that are being made by the AI. So that's a fantastic example, and I think, what more can you say? Now, at this point, what I would do is then go on to do a color calibration with SPCC, and all right, so here is the result. Now I'll do a linked view, and you can see that SPCC has done its job, and we have beautiful colors. And at this point, we could take one more step with BlurXTerminator. So now I will turn this off, but we'll choose whatever degree of sharpening we might want, additional deconvolution. Since the correction of the aberrations is actually part of what you're generally doing, you can now go, at least I would be more conservative and go a little bit less on additional deconvolution. Of course, I still want a little bit of that in my non-stellar as well. So I'll just do a little bit more here, and we can see what it does to this. Now, this is a wide field image. I'm zoomed in 300%. These details are tiny. This is not BlurXTerminator's, this isn't going to somehow make the image all that much more spectacular unless you're zoomed in 300%. So for me, it's the correction of this field, being a wide field image, that just really does the most remarkable part. So I've done a very conservative amount here just to get a little bit more of that deconvolution, but considering where we started from, this totally makes this now a perfect beginning point for processing this data. And I did actually do this. One of the important points that I wanted to make about the final version of this image, let me just zoom out and show this to you. The field is filled with wonderful nebulosity. It has some blue things near the bottom and some really strange bits over towards the right side as well. There's star clusters which come out BlurXTerminator helps with that. But here's the part that I thought was most intriguing, is that I did not know in this field there was something that was interesting. Over here, there is what, I mean, it just looks like a planetary nebula. There's just no question about that. I didn't know what it was at all, and I had to go look it up. It turns out this is one of the first of the very famous Nicholas Outer's
really?
discoveries. This is OU1. Didn't know it. Didn't know it was in the field at all. And all the processing that I did was with that lack of knowledge. So the very fact that at the end of the day, these small numbers of pixels here, with the correction that was done with the BlurXTerminator, we did the correction, then we did the color calibration, and then of course went back and maybe did more, and then I did all my processing, and at the end of the day, everything works out. Most importantly, the central star is still blue. And that star is literally like 3 pixels across. So if at any point in all of those steps that was somehow commingled, or if that was somehow disturbed or messed up, I would not have thought this was a planetary nebula, wouldn't have even caught my eye. So that really goes towards the fidelity of keeping that fidelity of the original information in a way that, I was actually, I had no knowledge of until I had looked around the field and then found something interesting.
If there's one more thing I could mention on this example, it's a good example that you chose, and you showed the workflow of applying BlurXTerminator in the correct-only mode prior to doing color calibration. Now, with earlier versions of BlurXTerminator, because of the problem with flux conservation that I mentioned, that was not a recommended flow. Because not only would AI2 not always conserve flux, it would often do it differently in each color channel. And that could very easily throw off SPCC and you'd get an incorrect color balance as a result of that. With AI4 and its greatly improved flux conservation, it's also well matched in color channel. And I think in most of the testing that I did, I see more accurate results from SPCC after doing a correct-only run with BlurXTerminator than I do before, especially on images that have pretty strong aberrations like this one did in the corners before you corrected it. That, the stars get misshapen enough in the corners, and SPCC may have trouble extracting all of the flux correctly from those point spread functions. And correcting them and making them just nice round point spread functions, I think may be improving the accuracy of SPCC itself.
All right, Russ, so I have another example, because earlier we were talking about some of the performance improvements with regards to dense fields and the flux conservation, and all of that together. A globular cluster with something of interest inside of it is kind of the big challenge that you could, give to BlurXTerminator. And I thought that M15 would be a really interesting object to look at. What I have here is 30-second exposures, and I really didn't have that many. When I took my picture of M15 long ago, I took some very short exposures just to take care of the core. So I took this data back in, 2015. And then I also took long exposures. The funny thing is that the long exposures don't help me in this example. M15 has a planetary nebula in it. One of the furthest that you can see, M15 is like 40,000 light years away. So it has a tiny, it appears tiny anyway, planetary nebula. And to see it or detect it is one of these challenges that amateurs, of course, enjoy doing. HSD, no problem. From ground-based imaging, it's a problem. One of the things I learned by doing this exercise is it actually has to be very short exposures. It's a 15th magnitude star, and to detect it, you really can't blow it out too much. So I had some data, and I wanted to see, well, is it possible? So this is what M15, just straight up RGB, now it's been color corrected, but just straight up RGB data, what it looks like of the core. It's not especially good seeing. It's not especially bad seeing either. It's just kind of typical stuff. Pease is in there. Pease 1 is the name of the planetary nebula, and it's in there. Now, if you can positively identify it on the screen, I'm going to be really impressed. Here, I'll zoom in. I'll even show it to you better. it's there, right? I don't think you're going to be able to identify it easily. So the first thing I want to do is I would like to go ahead and just run, BlurXTerminator on it, but I'm going to do this very quickly. I'm going to make a copy of this. And what I'd like to do is just do it in the, because these are stars, I'd like to demonstrate the difference between the stars only. So I'm going to turn on, well, I'll just set this to 0 here for the non-stellar adjustments. And I'm just going to go completely maximal on sharpening the stars. We'll need it in this particular case. This is we're doing this for the fun of discovery. This is not necessarily to make the best image in the world. And what we end up with is an image that looks like this. Now I'm going to do something similar with the other copy here, but this time we'll actually turn on, the sharpening here, and I'll apply it again. Give it just a second. All right. And what I'd like you to note, or what I'd like, I know you know this, but I'd like everyone to note, is that there is a difference between the two in that the one that we did with the non-stellar adjustment, for the stars, it also kind of shows more sharpening just in general. So you can see that on the right, we are getting that effect. But on the left, this is just without the nebula, the non-stellar rather, sharpening. So it's my understanding that you're leaving this in kind of as an option if it's necessary. If you're finding that you have a problem, like in a crowded area such as this, in this crowded area, you can see some artifacts in the background, but that's really just because this is such a noisy image. These are 30-second exposures, and literally, I think I had I don't even think I had 5 of them. So very, very noisy image. I think it does a fair job here. Is that a good summary of what's going on?
Yeah, that's basically a piece of advice for some images and globulars are a good example where you have extremely dense star fields, and there's a lot of unresolved stuff. It's stars, but it's unresolved that really just can't be deconvolved. And in some cases, BlurXTerminator with high values of non-stellar sharpening, it'll see that stuff, those unresolved stars, as non-stellar structures and try to deconvolve them into something weird.
Right.
And so with an image of a globular, there's really not a lot of non-stellar content. Right. So just go ahead and set the non-stellar sharpening down to 0 to avoid those artifacts.
Right. However, in this particular case, there is a tiny, tiny little non-stellar thing in this frame. And I will now point it out to you. I will put it near the center here, and then I will do the same here. And then we'll zoom in a little bit, and we'll zoom in a little bit. This right here, if I undo this and I redo it, what is really interesting to me is that BlurXTerminator, through its AI brain, knows or kind of senses that this is not like a star. And if you go back and forth, you can see that it doesn't sharpen like a star does. Now, with the increased sharpening of turning on the non-stellar adjustment, we do get a much sharper image. And in this sharper image, it's still kind of hard to tell, and really the problem is here that we're still displaying this in some linear way. So what I'd like to do is the following. I'm just going to very quickly do a masked stretch like this on this image. And then at the end of the day, I think we can say that we have positively identified Pease 1, which I just think is the most amazing thing. I have never, so I took this data back in 2015. I looked at the data everywhere. I couldn't see it. I was never convinced I was able to see it. And now, look at that thing. There it is. Can you see the little pink here?
Yeah,
Let me try to.
Red and blue. Yeah.
Yeah, it's blue in the center, and it has a little bit of a pinkness surrounding it.
Yeah.
That is the planetary nebula. There it is. There's a detection, and just for further confirmation, I have on the screen somewhere, probably hiding, I have the yes, here it is, the HST image of exactly the same, and I've rotated the field. So if you look very closely here, you'll see 1, 2, 3, 4 stars here. That is the same as 1, 2, 3, 4 stars here. Here's the nebula. This star here, if you can see my cursor, is the same as this one here. And this one here is the same as this one here. It's all there. And that's what Pease 1 looks like from the ground. I just think it's amazing. I mean, it's only like 2 arc seconds in size. I am zoomed in 900% to be able to show you that. And the point that I think is most remarkable is that had BlurXTerminator not conserved flux, had it done anything with the nearby pixels and somehow made an artifact, the blue would not have stand out. The red would have been merged with other noisy elements of this. Everything would have, there was every opportunity not to be able to see this at the end of the day. In fact, I've never seen it before. So Russ, thanks. This was cool. That's what I think is fun. I've never seen Pease 1 in my own data, and I just think that that's great.
That's a really good test, and I'm glad you ran it because it shows a number of things. It shows BlurXTerminator can differentiate between stellar and non-stellar objects. And in this case, I'm actually surprised that it did as well as it did, because a very tiny planetary nebula like that at that pixel sampling looks a lot like an out-of-focus star. Looks a lot like a slightly out-of-focus star. And BlurXTerminator was able to use all the other stars in the field as a reference for the point spread function, and no, it's just doing math. That no, actually, that's not an out-of-focus star, because look at all these other stars that don't show that. That's a non-stellar object, so it's going to be treated differently.
Right. All right. So on your release notes, one of the things that you were able to do that I'm not as easily able to do is to show from the beginning, you know, what the initial AI looked like, and then following with AI 2, and then following that with now the latest and greatest version. It so happens, though, because of what we did last year, I was able to do that on just bringing up the same image here of M88. Now, the differences are small. You really have to zoom in to see this performance improvement on, you know, just looking at details. But there are some other areas that I think you are, you know, describing in your release notes that are of interest. One of them is this. This was what the behavior was of the original AI, where it was possible to get this kind of overabundance of color in the centers of things where the brightness in one channel was increased rather dramatically compared to the others as part of the deconvolution process. And then there were some improvements made by going to AI 2, some improvements. So it got a little bit better. And then, of course, I'd like to show you, and I'm just concerned about this galaxy here, what it looks like today without any other, any other adjustments. So I just ran the new version of the AI, and you know, now we're getting none of that behavior. And I should say, by the way, that this behavior that I'm noting here, this is part of, I reprocessed the whole thing. This is part of an LRGB image. So it isn't just straight RGB. By adding an L, by adding a different luminance image, it only enhances any of these deviations, if you will, these color differences that you might get between the channels because of the deconvolution. And today, it looks great. So I just wanted to point that out, that is definitely improvement. While I'm here, let me also point out one more thing, which is that off to the side, here's a relatively bright star. And I'd like to show the difference between AI1 and AI2. They look pretty similar here, but that's just because this one's overly bright. If I show you what the, I know what I need to do. Let me go all the way, not here, sorry. Go all the way to here, right back to where we apply BlurXTerminator, actually. So here's the application of BlurXTerminator there. And here is the application of BlurXTerminator here. And the interesting thing is that today, the performance of the new AI, it has this great feature of filling out the PSF, because the PSF here has been saturated. It is saturated in the data, but it can be saturated in one color more than the other, and you get this kind of bias in color where that saturation occurs, and you have this kind of flat top. Whereas I understand it, now the PSFs are, they're basically filled out so that you don't get that bias in color. And well, that's super helpful, not only for, one-shot.
That's right. Yeah. The reason that happens, of course, is because if you're shooting with a monochrome camera, you shoot your red, green, blue, the bright stars are going to saturate at the same level in all channels at whatever the camera saturation point, which comes up to be 1 in your integrated data. That's, a pixel value of 1 in PixInsight. But then you do color balancing, and now the levels are different, and you'll see a purple star core like you see in this case, and or some other color depending on the color balance values. So BlurXTerminator AI4 was trained to recognize that clipping at different levels in different color channels, and to fill in the tops of the PSFs. So it'll take the cores of stars all the way back up to a pixel value of 1 in all channels, and do there really is no information there, but it has the whole point spread function around it to make a very good guess about what the top of that star profile should look like, and it just fills it in.
And just to show people, because you've got to understand just how amazing this is. I'm zoomed in 300%. This is the before, and this is now after with BlurXTerminator. So obviously just the overall general deconvolution that you get is just, it's out of this world. But I wanted to demonstrate this kind of technical thing of that correction of the PSF. So that's remarkable. Now I have this really fantastic example of kind of how BlurXTerminator now is handling very, very bright objects, like another planetary nebula, as it so happens. This has a very bright star in the center, and then there's critical detail, if you will, that is right next to the star. And so seeing its performance on a planetary nebula I thought would be a very interesting one. In our conversation, you had mentioned the Cat's Eye Nebula. I have one of those, I have some data on that, but I actually thought that this particular, this nebula, NGC 2392, might even be a better example, in the sense that some of these features, both in the dim and the bright areas, right in that central region, it's tough. It's a challenge for, deconvolution in general. So this is what a straight up RGB image, now this has been color corrected, RGB image of the nebula looks like, without any enhancement. I didn't do any, special thing yet. But it's at this point, while the image is in its linear form, that I would like to apply BlurXTerminator. And my application here of it is to, I don't want to go too crazy. I've got sharpening of the stars, and then I have a non-stellar sharpening that happens to some certain degree. And I apply it, and we get something that looks like that. And that's just amazing, because I'm going to do the before here and the after. It really starts to show all of the structures that are inside the galaxy without any, again, that star is right there, and any kind of, in many kinds of deconvolution algorithms where you're right there at the faint end of the point spread function, you can get a turnover, you can get ringing, all of the kinds of bad things that you don't want to get. You don't get that here. And by not getting it here, it just gives you those few extra pixels to be able to more clearly see, some of these very fine details that are there. And so what I did is I took this image and then I, resampled it so that I could then work on it and then get something that was somewhat reasonable. So I increased the saturation, obviously, brought out those reds and showed much more of that structure inside. And this might be what I produce for the nebula today. Now let me show you what I was doing in 2015. This is the image that I generated in 2015. Now they're actually very similar to one another, but there's something that you really got to understand. BlurXTerminator didn't exist back then. When I worked on this image, I was doing, there must have been like 10 different things that I did. Starting with, for example, and you'll know this maybe, I don't know that many people today would even know what this is, but there used to be a deconvolution algorithm called maximum entropy, and it was available in CCD Stack, and 0 people could ever get it to work. I mean, it just never worked, right? It could kind of work if you just did the right number of iterations and you didn't let it diverge into some crazy mess. And so that was one element of this, what you see on my attempt on the right. And then I would do things that in the day were done, which is the high pass filtering and other atom block special things that I would do to get what I thought was a good result. And that's great, but you have to understand that this took me probably 3 hours to make, where in one button press with BlurXTerminator, I can get to that point. And I can get to that point with, again, we've been demonstrating a lot of the fidelity that we have in the data after the deconvolution is run, that I have much more confidence in what's going on. Now, one of the interesting things is that the image on the right, I worked very hard, but I'm actually showing my work in the sense that you've allowed me to do something that really is very difficult to do, or it has been previously. A lot of the data that I've taken, there are no references. There's nothing for me to compare to. Comparing to HST doesn't work. There are very few references where I can look at my image and say, you know what? I kind of put some stuff in there that's not really there. You can actually compare my work now. What you have on the left is BlurXTerminator, and what's on the right is me in the day back in 2015. I don't think I was inventing anything, and this is what it's like to actually show your work at the highest resolution. I'm zoomed in here after resampling the image to show things. But even in 10 minutes, which is all I took here to do the image on the left, I'm able to get to what took me lots of different complex manipulations and stuff that I was doing, 8 to 10 years ago. So again, as I do on each of these videos, I need to thank you, Russ. This is just, it adds fun, it adds convenience, it's everything that you would want for a deconvolution algorithm. It's really great.
Well, you're very welcome. And, I work hard on this stuff because, I did a lot of the same tricks back in the day, and it was tedious and it was full of doubt, And at any point along the way, you realize, 5 steps ago, I clipped the data, so now I've got to back up and do it again. And yeah, so I did these tools because they were tools that I want to use when I'm processing my data. And I'm just pleased that other people can find them useful as well.
Well, Russ, this has been a fantastic session just to kind of become familiar with the new performance of AI4. And I know that you're continuing, I know that you're still working on stuff. This is not the end. This is only one more step in the process to making these leaps with this new tool. I mean, this, AI now in our world is a really, it's certainly an influence in many different areas. And to have that as a powerful one in our astrophotography is really just fantastic.
Yep, I'll keep trucking, keep making more. The next update is going to be for StarXTerminator, and there's some really exciting new features coming. If I can get the network to learn them, I'm pushing it pretty hard.
So down below this video, hopefully people can comment about their experience, especially with the release of the tool. They can do as I've done and try to see how it performs. In addition, I'll have some links both to your site as well as, of course, a kind of a sponsored link, thank you, Russ, to your new version of this. And if people already have it, they can just start using it. If people do not yet have BlurXTerminator, well, this is the time of year. And gosh, if this doesn't convince you, I don't know what would. This is really amazing stuff. So again, thank you, Russ, and I want to wish everyone watching the video, a happy new year, and I look forward to doing more of these kinds of things going forward. So thank you very much for being supportive of the channel and of my site. There are much more videos that explain how I do the kinds of processing that you've seen. BlurXTerminator is one important part, but much more goes into it. So please check out the videos at atomblockstudios.com, and you'll have much more information there. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Adam.
Yep.